This is slide 13 in our 60s unit as we get back to and we'll finish our discussion of the civil rights movement. Okay. One big difference kind of between the 50s and the 60s is that the 60s things turned a lot more deadly, a lot more violent, a lot more militant. Right? We'll start with, though, another example of peaceful, nonviolent protesting, and that is the Freedom Riders. Right? These are college students, again, okay, who will work to end segregation on interstate buses. If you'll recall, thanks to the Montgomery bus boycott, Supreme Court ruled segregation on interstate buses was illegal and in those bus stations. So these are college students. Here you see a picture of them. They're all joining arms, singing, happy as they are about to board their bus to ride through the Deep South. This does not go well. Right? As you can imagine, the Freedom Riders are not welcomed with open arms as they roll into the southern cities to see if bus stations and bus lines are integrated as they're supposed to be. Oftentimes the buses, word spreads that the buses are heading to town. And when they enter the county or the city, white supremacists are there to greet them. They would often set up roadblocks to stop the buses. They would throw Molotov cocktails at buses. Here you see a picture of what's left of a Greyhound bus after it's been burned out. So they would throw these bottles full of gasoline and a rag stuffed in the top, lit on fire, and then when you throw the bottle and it breaks, the gas spreads and so does the fire. And they would throw them inside these buses, and fire would spread inside the bus. So the bus would pull over to the side of the road. All the Freedom Riders inside would come scrambling out to get away from the fire, where white Southerners are waiting to greet them with beatings. So you stay on the bus and burn to death, or you get off of the bus and get beaten to death, whichever. But either way, these are not good things, obviously. Okay? Let's turn our attention to Birmingham, what Dr. King would call the most segregated city in America, Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham is run by this guy you see here, the police chief known as Eugene Connor was his name. He was known better as Bull Connor, Eugene Bull Connor. And when protests would spring up in Birmingham, the protesters, even though they were committed to peaceful, nonviolent protesting, were greeted with violence. Here you see very famous photos. The police, German Shepherd there, the trained dog attacking the young black man, the protester. The Birmingham Fire Department using high-pressure fire hoses on protesters there. Birmingham was a very difficult city, the most segregated city in America, again, as Dr. King called it. But this is significant. Oh, sorry, forgot to highlight Bull Connor's name there. This event is significant because this will turn public opinion. Video of the protesters being beaten by police officers and attacked with police dogs, and having the fire department spraying them with hoses, ends up on nightly news. And when people across the United States and the world end up seeing this, public opinion starts to turn in favor of the protesters. So this really comes back to bite the white Southerners here. Okay? That was kind of early 60s. Spring 63 is really when the Birmingham protests get going. In August of that same year, August 63, Dr. King will lead a march in Washington, D.C. Over 200,000 supporters, black and white both, supported President Kennedy's call for new civil rights legislation. This march will culminate with Dr. King's famous "I Have a Dream" speech. Close to 250,000 people as King gives his speech from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, and where better to give it than at the memorial to the president that made all this possible by freeing the slaves during the Civil War. Okay. The 24th Amendment will be passed. We've talked about a number of amendments this year. The 24th Amendment, ratified in January of 1964, will abolish the poll tax in federal elections. Yes, we still have a poll tax around 1964. So the 24th Amendment will get rid of that. Okay? Let's talk about Freedom Summer, 1964. Freedom Summer. This is it's organized by SNCC, again, the Students for Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Nonviolent Protest, and they will send volunteers, college students, throughout the South to register black voters, so they are able to vote. Right? They are going to Mississippi, the worst of the southern states in terms of allowing black voting and registering black voters. So college students, black and white, will go to Mississippi to register black voters. As soon as this gets started, it goes badly. Early on, in the first weeks, or the first week of the movement, 3 volunteers, here you see their pictures over there, Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Michael Schwerner, just collectively known as Goodman, Chaney, and Schwerner. There you see their pictures. Okay, there's Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Michael Schwerner. Okay? They are pulled over by local police in Mississippi on a traffic charge, a trumped-up traffic charge, and local police will arrest them and hand them over to the local KKK chapter. Okay? These 3 young men were beaten to death, and their bodies were buried in an earthen dam along a lake in Mississippi. They weren't found until several months later. Couple of weeks of heavy rains began to wash away the dam, and their bodies were exposed. Okay? The FBI arrested 21 white Mississippi men, including the local sheriff, who were put on trial. White juries acquitted them all, meaning they were found not guilty. Okay? Here you'll see a picture of the local sheriff here, kicked back with his leg crossed there and his pouch of chewing tobacco. His deputy there, both put on trial. It doesn't look like from the picture that they are too worried about the outcome of that trial. And this was what passed as, justice in the South. White men put on trial were never found guilty. It's a really good movie made about this called Mississippi Burning. Highly recommend watching that if you get the opportunity. But this is Freedom Summer, 1964. Not so much freedom. Okay? Let's finish up by talking about Selma. Okay? Selma's a city in Alabama. In March of 1965, Dr. King led a voter registration march in Selma as protesters were marching from Selma to the nearby state capital of Montgomery. State troopers, these are, men in charge of law and order in Alabama. State troopers met the protesters and attacked the marchers on their way to Montgomery. A white minister, a minister from Boston who had come to Selma for the march, and a white woman from Detroit were among those killed. So it wasn't just black people that were targeted. It was anybody, whites included, who stood up for them. Okay. A week or so later, after the video of the beatings of the protesters goes nationwide, Dr. King comes back and leads another march, this time, as you see, supported by federal troops. Okay? But Selma will become kind of a signpost for the protest movement and the violence there. Really good movie, just called Selma. Highly recommend watching. All right, so as you see, things do indeed turn deadlier.